He paid only $3 to save a mysterious Apache woman from a cruel trader, but the next morning, dozens of warriors surrounded his ranch. Their leader revealed a shocking secret. The woman was the wife of an Apache chief. What happened next changed the cowboy's life forever. Watch this emotional Wild West story, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. The harsh winter of 1887 had settled over the Arizona territory, covering the dusty frontier roads with a bitter cold that made every journey dangerous. Ethan Walker, a quiet cowboy known more for his actions than his words, rode into a small frontier town one evening to purchase supplies for his lonely ranch. The town was nearly empty, its wooden buildings creaking beneath the cold, desert wind. As Ethan passed the trading post, he heard shouting coming from behind the building. Curious but cautious, he stopped his horse and walked toward the noise. There, he saw a mysterious Apache woman standing beside a rough wooden wagon. Her wrists were tied with rope, and her clothing was torn and covered in dust. A desperate trader stood before her, angrily arguing with another man about her value. Ethan immediately noticed the fear in the woman's eyes. But there was something else there too, a quiet strength that told him she had survived much worse than this. The trader saw Ethan watching and called out, saying, "The woman was trouble and nobody wanted her." He claimed she was worth nothing and offered to let Ethan take her for $3. Ethan stared at the man with disbelief. $3 was barely enough to buy a decent meal, let alone the life of another human being. Without saying much, Ethan reached into his coat, pulled out $3 silver and placed them in the trader's hand. The trader laughed, believing Ethan had simply bought himself a problem, but Ethan had no intention of treating the woman as property. He immediately untied her hands and stepped away, giving her space. The woman looked at him with confusion, as though she could not understand why a stranger had chosen to help her. Ethan simply told her that she was free to leave if she wanted, but the cold night was dangerous, and his ranch was only a few miles away. The woman hesitated before quietly accepting his offer. During the journey, she remained almost completely silent. Ethan did not pressure her with questions. He understood that sometimes silence was the only shield a wounded person had left. When they finally reached his small ranch, Ethan brought her inside and lit a fire in the stone fireplace. He gave her warm blankets, clean water, and the little food he had available. The woman watched him carefully, perhaps expecting another demand or hidden condition, but Ethan asked for nothing. He simply left her alone near the fire and prepared a small room where she could sleep safely. Later, that night, Ethan heard the sound of footsteps outside. He reached for his rifle and cautiously looked through the window, but there was no one there. The strange feeling remained, however, as if something unseen was moving through the darkness. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise and discovered that the mysterious woman was already standing outside his cabin. She was staring toward the distant mountains. Ethan noticed that her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with hope. Before he could ask what she was looking at, a deep rumble echoed across the valley. Ethan turned toward the horizon and saw several riders approaching at great speed. More appeared behind them until dozens of Apache warriors were visible against the rising sun. Ethan immediately grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. The riders surrounded the ranch but did not attack. Their horses were decorated with traditional markings, and their leader wore an impressive feathered headdress. Ethan stood firmly between the strangers and the woman he had rescued. The Apache leader slowly dismounted and looked directly at Ayanna. The moment their eyes met, the woman's face filled with emotion. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the approaching chief. The leader finally spoke in a calm but powerful voice. He said they had been searching for Ayanna for many days. Ethan remained silent, waiting for an explanation. Then the chief revealed the truth that would change Ethan's life forever. The mysterious woman he had found in that dusty frontier town was not a common traveler or a helpless prisoner. She was Ayanna, the beloved wife of the Apache tribe's chief. The $3 Ethan had paid had not purchased a woman. Instead, without knowing it, he had rescued the most important woman in the tribe. Ethan had never expected anything in return when he handed those $3 to the trader. To him, Ayanna was simply a human being who needed help. Yet now, standing before dozens of Apache warriors, he realized that his simple act of kindness had placed him at the center of something much larger than himself. The Apache chief studied Ethan carefully, as if trying to understand the intentions of the silent cowboy who had protected his wife. Ethan lowered his rifle and explained that he had not bought Ayanna. He had only paid the trader to stop him from hurting her. The chief's expression slowly softened. Ayanna stepped forward, her eyes filled with gratitude, and finally revealed the truth about her capture. She had been traveling when ruthless traders ambushed her and took her prisoner. Knowing that her identity could put her life in danger, they hid the fact that she was the chief's wife. They planned to sell her to another group and disappear. Before anyone could find her, Ethan's arrival had interrupted their plan. For the first time, Ayanna spoke openly, telling Ethan that his kindness had given her a chance to survive. The chief then offered Ethan an unexpected honor, but Ethan refused to accept any reward. He only wanted Ayanna to return safely to her people. Yet before leaving, the chief made Ethan a promise that would later change the history of the entire region. He told Ethan that his people would never forget the cowboy who treated their chief's wife with dignity when others treated her like property. From that day forward, Ethan's small ranch became a place where two different worlds slowly learned to trust one another. What began with $3 and a silent act of kindness would soon become the beginning of an unlikely friendship, a powerful alliance, and a story remembered for generations. Ethan stood silently as the Apache warriors surrounded his ranch, their horses shifting nervously beneath the pale morning sun. The air was tense, and even the desert wind seemed to have stopped. Ethan could see that the riders were not ordinary warriors. They were disciplined, watchful, and ready to defend their people if necessary. At the front of the group sat Chief Dakota, a powerful man with a calm but commanding presence. His eyes moved from Ayanna to Ethan, studying them both carefully. For several long moments, nobody spoke. Ethan kept his hands away from his rifle, refusing to make any sudden movement that could turn the situation into violence. Ayanna stood a few steps behind him, her face filled with emotions she could barely hide. She had finally found the people she had been desperately trying to return to, but she also knew that Ethan had risked everything to keep her safe. Chief Dakota slowly dismounted from his horse and walked forward. His warriors remained behind him, watching every movement. Ethan expected anger. He expected accusations. After all, he had unknowingly taken the wife of an Apache chief to his ranch. But instead of reaching for a weapon, Dakota simply looked at Ayanna. The moment their eyes met, Ayanna stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she began explaining everything that had happened. She told her husband that she had been traveling to meet him when a group of ruthless traders attacked her. They had taken her prisoner, tied her hands, and hidden her identity. The traders knew that if they discovered she was the chief's wife, they could demand a much higher price for her or use her as a bargaining tool. So they pretended she was simply an unwanted Apache woman with no family and no one willing to search for her. They moved her from place to place, waiting for the right buyer. Ayanna had feared that she might never see he, husband, or her people again. Then Ethan had appeared. He had paid $3 to stop the trader from mistreating her and taken her away from the cruel men who had been holding her. Ethan listened quietly as Ayanna spoke. He had never known the full danger she had escaped. He had only seen a frightened woman who needed help. When Ayanna finished, Chief Takoda turned his attention toward Ethan. The cowboy expected the worst. Instead, the chief walked closer and lowered his head slightly in a gesture of respect. He thanked Ethan for protecting Ayanna when others had treated her like property. Takoda explained that many men would have taken advantage of her situation, but Ethan had done something different. He had given her food, shelter, and freedom without asking for anything in return. For that reason, Takoda said, Ethan had earned the respect of his people. He then made an unexpected offer. Ethan was invited to visit the Apache village as an honored guest, where he would be treated as a friend rather than an outsider. But Takoda's offer went even further. He proposed an alliance between the Apache people and the nearby ranchers, hoping to prevent unnecessary bloodshed and protect both communities from criminals who preyed upon travelers and settlers. Ethan listened carefully. He knew such an alliance would not be easy. For years, fear and suspicion had kept the two groups apart. Too many people had lost family members, homes, and loved ones because of hatred and revenge. But Ethan also knew that peace had to begin somewhere. He looked at Ayanna and remembered the frightened woman he had found in the trading post. He remembered how she had expected cruelty from him because that was what others had taught her to expect. Yet, Ethan had simply done what he believed was right. When Takoda offered him land, wealth, and a place of honor among his people, Ethan shook his head. He did not want payment for what he had done. He did not consider himself a hero. He simply looked at the chief and said she was a person who needed help. The words were simple, but they carried a meaning that everyone understood. Ayanna lowered her eyes, fighting back tears. Chief Takoda remained silent for several seconds before placing one hand over his heart. Then he promised Ethan that his people would remember his kindness. From that day forward, something began to change across the Arizona territory. Ethan and Chief Takoda slowly built a relationship based on trust. They began working together to protect travelers from dangerous gangs and criminals who attacked both Apache families and isolated ranches. When disputes arose between settlers and Apache hunters, Ethan often helped both sides communicate before anger turned into violence. His ranch became a neutral meeting place where people could speak without fear. Ayanna also became an important part of this new understanding. She visited Ethan's ranch regularly, carrying messages between her people and the settlers. Over time, the old suspicion began to fade. The alliance did not erase every problem, and there were still men who wanted war because they believed peace would cost them power. But Ethan and Takoda refused to surrender to hatred. Their friendship became stronger with every challenge they faced. The silent cowboy who had once lived alone now found himself surrounded by people who respected him. Yet Ethan never forgot how the entire story had begun. It had started with $3, a frightened woman, and a decision to show kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Years later, people would tell the story of the cowboy who unknowingly rescued an Apache chief's wife. But Ethan always believed the real lesson was much simpler. A person should never be judged by their clothes, their tribe, or their past. When someone is suffering, kindness is not a weakness. Sometimes one small act of courage can change the lives of hundreds, and in the wide, unforgiving land of the American frontier, Ethan Walker's simple decision to help a stranger became the first step toward peace between two worlds that had spent far too long living in fear of one another. By the time the sun began to set over the Arizona hills, the Apache warriors had prepared to leave. Ayanna stood beside her husband, but before she mounted her horse, she turned toward Ethan. She thanked him for seeing her as a human being when others had seen only a price. "Tag!" Ethan simply nodded, his usual quiet expression returning to his face. Chief Takoda then extended his hand, and Ethan accepted it. Neither man needed many words. They both understood that a new chapter had begun. The next morning, Ethan rode toward the distant Apache village, not as a prisoner or an enemy, but as a welcomed friend. The $3 he had spent had bought him nothing, yet the kindness behind those $3 had given him something far more valuable. The respect of a people, the friendship of a chief, and the chance to help create peace where hatred had once ruled.